Hello to wherever you may be in the world listening to me. Today, as we continue our look at sports and exercise psychology, we want to talk about the topic concentration. And you will see in a little while that concentration is considered one of the most important attributes for any athlete. Before we get into that, let's begin simply by defining concentration. So we can say that concentration is the ability to exert deliberate mental effort on what is most important in a given situation. Other terms that would be related to concentration are focus or attention. And I'm sure if you've been around sports, you might hear athletes saying, focus on the ball, focus on this, focus on that, as they attempt to bring their minds, that deliberate mental effort, on the important thing at any particular moment. And I think the picture there of somebody playing billiards, you get a real good sense of the person's focus, attention, and concentration at that one moment in time. Now, in talking about concentration, we can consider four components of concentration. And we're going to go through each of these four things in a systematic manner. The first we're going to talk about is focusing on the relevant environmental cues. Then we'll talk a little bit about maintaining attentional focus, then situational awareness, and finally shifting attentional focus when necessary. So let's look at that first item, focusing on relevant environmental cues. Now, within the context of athletic performance, like much of life, there are many things that can distract us or take our attention away from what is important. You can think about this athlete, Rondo, I believe it is, if you know NBA basketball. He's about to shoot a free throw. And the crowd behind him wants him to miss it. And they actually start up holding up signs designed to make him miss the free throw. And so there are all kinds of external distractors from the crowd. You could be having a bad day. You could have situations at home that are not too pleasant. And they are personal concerns that are very real. They can distract you. Thoughts of winning or losing can distract you. Your opponents might be talking to you using trash talk. They can distract you. You might be physically exhausted at that moment in time. That can distract you. Concentration is the ability to remove your mind from all of those things that are not relevant to the task at hand, which is putting that ball through the hoop and being able just to focus on the skills and the execution necessary to achieve that. And so a key aspect of concentration is learning to focus on relevant environmental cues. In that context, we can talk about the types of attentional focus. And there are actually four broad definitions of attentional focus, not definitions, four broad types. We divide it into two categories. First of all, you can have external versus internal focus. And I think that's pretty straightforward, right? An external focus will be focusing on the things physically going on around you, whether it's the opposition, whether it's the noise of the crowd, whether it's the arena, whatever it is. Whereas an internal focus will be focusing on what's going on with you. What are your thoughts? How are you feeling? What are your emotions? Are you experiencing any pain? So you can have an internal focus or an external attentional focus. And then your focus can either be broad or narrow. Are you focusing on many things at the same time? Are you focusing on the crowd? Are you focusing on the opposition? Are you focusing on the ball? All at the same time, constantly switching. Or are you focused on one thing, a narrow focus? You're just focusing on the target. Now, what you now realize, using those four determinants, that allows four categories to emerge. So you can have external broad focus. And we tend to use that to rapidly assess a situation. Just like a quarterback, when he has to throw the ball, he has to rapidly assess many things. He has to look at where his wide receivers are. But at the same time, he has to be thinking about what about the defense? who's where, how are they moving? There are many moving parts. He also might have to be thinking about where he's placing his feet, how he's going to execute the throw. And so that's a broad external focus. But a broad narrow focus would be when he's right about to throw the ball, he zones in directly on who is he throwing it to and where he wants to achieve that throw. Where does he want that throw to end up? And so he starts off broad looking at everything, but when he comes down to execution, he now narrows down. Both of those were external. But what about internal? Well, a broad internal focus would be like analyzing a game plan. Like what are the things or the strategy that's necessary to execute this throw if we keep the throw. But then a narrow internal focus would be, okay, let me focus specifically on what's required for this particular shot, this particular throw. And so we take the four things and they can be applied to many different aspects of sport performance. Now, the question you might want to ask yourself is, well, what should an athlete focus on? Should his focus be external or internal? And to be honest, if you have been doing this course, you might think because of focus on psychology, we would be saying or telling you to focus internal. But research has shown that athletes who have an external focus perform better. So it means then that what you want to do is you want to try and get your athletes to focus externally as opposed to focus internally. And this is something that coaches also need to know, because very often when we're teaching technique, we often make the term or we focus on the athlete's body, it's internal. And what has been shown is if you focus externally, it actually benefits the athlete. Here's some examples from tennis. You're teaching somebody to play the ground strokes, how to hit the ball. If you want them to focus internally, you can say, keep your wrist up. But it's been shown that if you focus externally, it's better. So rather than getting the athlete to focus on their wrist, let them focus on the racket by saying, point the tip of your racket to the sky. That lets the athlete not get concerned about their body and where it is. It lets them focus on the racket. And in pointing the tip of the racket to the sky, automatically they keep their wrist up. The same thing you can see, say, with leg power when serving. Coach might tell you, well, extend your knees, and explode from the hips. Another way of achieving that is to tell the athlete, imagine as you're serving, you're pushing the ground away from you suddenly or explosively. Well, to push the ground away from you explosively, what do you have to do? You have to push off and extend those knees and hips. But now you're focusing externally rather than internally. And so these are aspects of sports psychology that when applied in coaching can be very, very beneficial. It seems that the more distant the focus is, the better it is for the athlete. Somehow it relieves the mental pressure associated with focusing internally. Okay, let's go on to our next aspect of concentration, maintaining attentional focus. Now, most athletic performance is not going to occur in a short period of time. There's usually a certain duration. Even if you think about the 100-meter dash at the Olympics, there's a pre-preparation to that that's required. And during the whole process of, say, a tennis match that's 5 hours, or a football match that could go to extra time and could end up being over 2.5 hours, 3 hours with the time before, the athletes have to have attentional focus over a long period of time. Now, you will know that's difficult. It's difficult to concentrate on any one thing for 2 hours, for 3 hours, even for an hour. That's very, very difficult. But the nature of sport is there's often downtimes built into the sport. And so what you can do is you have to learn how to switch on and to switch off. How to be able to reduce your attentional focus when it's not so relevant and bring back that attentional focus when it is relevant. Now that's a skill that has to be learned because often if athletes switch off, they can't switch on again. But athletes have to be able to develop this to ensure that when required, they have attentional focus on the important things. Here's a well-known English batsman from the sport of cricket in the 1980s. And he makes this statement: I switch off the moment the ball is dead. What's he saying? When the ball is being bowled, he's focused. But once that ball is finished, he switches off. Then I relax completely. I have a chat, I make a joke. But as soon as the bowler reaches his mark, I switch back onto the game. I think anybody who can concentrate totally all the time, and that's the key word there, all the time, is inhuman. I certainly can't. And so he describes his process. He could be batting for 6, 7 hours. And to concentrate throughout that time is basically impossible. And so what he does is he gives his mind a break. Every time the ball goes dead, he says, okay, let me take a quick moment of rest. But I also have a marker for when I'm going to come back and turn on my focus. And that's when the bowler begins his run-up. That's Ian Botham. And then finally, in terms of concentration, we talk about maintaining situational awareness. Now, situational awareness is the fact that situations are changing in any athletic endeavor. And situational awareness means you have to be able to evaluate the situation, because each situation might require a different response. In the picture, you see a goalkeeper and a cross is coming in. And he needs to know, where is that ball going to end up? Where are the attackers? Where are the defenders? Should I come and catch the ball? Should I come and punch the ball? Or should I stay on my line? Each is a different response because the situation is different. And that ability to process the information and concentrate on the relevant information is absolutely critical to maintaining situational awareness. Experts have the ability to do this faster than novices, and therefore to make better decisions. Here we have a little video just talking about that.
George, free throws here. Plenty of time with 4.7 remaining.
J.R. Smith snatched the most precious rebound of his 14-year career.
It's grabbed by J.R. Smith. Smith instead of running out, I think J.R. didn't know how much time was left. J.R. could have dribbled up near the timeline, and we're going to overtime.
Then dribbled away the Cavs' chances to steal game one.
We thought it was over. Now we're up. Nobody's immune to mistakes. JR could have gone up and made a play, but mistakes happen.
That's a part of the game. Being locked in, and you gotta know the score. You gotta know if you're winning or losing or tie.
I thought we were all aware of what was going on. That's my view. So I don't know what JR was thinking.
Smith appeared to explain his thinking to a flabbergasted LeBron James after the clock went to 0 with the score even.
Goodness, I think JR thought the Cavs had the lead.
But following the Cavs' overtime loss, Smith's explanation was nearly as hard to fathom as the way he dribbled out the clock.
I knew it was tied.
He was in there saying that I knew it was tied. How would you now observe what you saw in that situation?
I don't know. I guess that further goes along with my theory. I thought he was looking for LeBron. I would have looked for LeBron too.
When the greatest player on the planet scores 50 for the first time ever in the finals, losing is not an option. This was Cleveland's chance to control the narrative, something that seemed possible when Smith controlled the rebound.
Disappointed that we didn't get the rebound first, and then we got lucky.
So that's an interesting account. It's a real story. It's not a story. It actually took place a couple of years ago in the NBA Finals, when it seems like a top professional athlete didn't maintain situational awareness. And so this is something we can all learn from, because it can even happen at the highest levels of the game. What about shifting attentional focus? This is also called attentional flexibility. And depending on the situation, you have to change what you focus on. And here we can actually utilize those categories that I was just telling you about, external and internal, and broad and narrow. And there's a basic flow that we often use, and it starts with external broad. It moves to internal broad. Then it moves to internal narrow, and it concludes with external narrow. That's a cycle, and let's look at that. Let's think about somebody about to hit a shot in golf. Well, remember we said it starts with external broad. They focus on many things. They focus on where the ball is, where the hole is, sorry, how far away is it? Are there lakes or sand bunkers around? What's the wind like? So it's broad and it's external. It's taking all the factors into account. Then they shift to broad internal. They now start to come up with a strategy based on past experience, based on the wind, and they think about how they have to hold the club, what angle they have to hit the club at, where they want the ball to land, how they want it to bounce. They're developing the strategy in their mind, how fast they want to swing the club. Then what they now have to shift to is actually just focusing on actually hitting the ball. They've already worked out how they want to hit it. Now they forget about the wind, they forget about everything else, and they want to focus on how do I breathe? How do I take back the shot? Everything is internal, I'll just focus on executing the shot. And then finally, they get narrow and external. They've gone from narrow internal to narrow external, and they focus laser-like on looking at the ball and now executing the shot. And that's a pretty good process that almost all action in sport actually occurs. But to go through that consciously every time can be very difficult unless you train your mind to be able to do this very quickly. So let's go through that again. Scan, plan, rehearse, lock in. Dimensions of attention in which we learn to shift our attentional focus at certain moments. Okay, now at the beginning I mentioned that concentration is considered one of the most important attributes for athletes. There were two psychologists, academics who came up with a list of the 8 physical and mental capacities that are associated with elite peak performance. And of those 8, 3, almost 40% were associated with concentration. Those 3 were being absorbed in the present and having no thoughts about the past or the future. So not focusing on what happened before, what happens tomorrow, just focusing on what's important right now. Second was being relaxed and having a high degree of concentration and control. And thirdly, was being in a state of extraordinary awareness of their own bodies and the external environment. And all of these things you realize relate to concentration. And what they've found is athletes who are successful, they have high levels of intentional control. And it actually is a discriminating factor versus athletes who are not successful. And I think that little clip of the NBA Finals is a good example, not meaning to belabor the point of focus on an individual. But there you saw success or failure didn't actually depend upon skill, but actually depended upon concentration and situal awareness at the time. Studies reveal that successful athletes aren't distracted by irrelevant stimuli, and they're able to focus on the task at hand and not on the outcome. What's required right now that will produce the outcome, as opposed to focusing on the outcome, which can lead to distraction. In that context, it has been shown, and this probably comes from experience, that if you compare expert and novice differences in attentional processing, expert players, they are able to pick up cues a lot quicker than novice players. So remember, in sport, often you are playing against somebody else, and you want to pick up how is the opponent going to move? Where are they going to send the ball? What are the little tells or little things that they do that give you insight into that? Expert players can focus on those things and pick them up. Novice players, they haven't learned how to pick them up. And that can make the difference between success and failure. This has has a lot to do with what's called anticipation, getting to the right place at the right time sooner. In that sense, expert players can focus on the movement patterns of their opponents better than novice players. Expert players are actually looking for these cues. They know what they're looking for, and they learn to pick up those things relevant to their sport. So this is not something that they might be able to do in all of life, but they've learned relevant to their sport how to do that. And especially for ball sports, expert players have learned to focus on things like the flight of the ball. So think about tennis. Is the ball has a low trajectory or does it have a high trajectory? That's going to affect how fast the ball arrives. That's going to affect how high the ball is going to bounce. And that ultimately affects where you need to position yourself to hit the ball. Or again, think about a wide receiver getting a throw from a quarterback. Once he spots that ball, or he sees how the quarterback is throwing the ball, he knows how to position himself based upon the trajectory. Now let's talk about something called attentional capacity. Now, the ability to concentrate and the ability to focus and give attention to something is a mental skill. It's a skill that requires processing capacity in your brain, and it also requires energy. And we know that actually attentional capacity is limited. Now, as far as attention goes, there are two types of processes. There are what's called controlled processes and automatic processes. In control processes, you're very much aware of what you're doing. You're focusing on the task at hand. Think about any new skill that you've tried to learn. When you're initially learning it, you're very much focused on the task, the sequence of events that your body has to go through in order to execute the task. But as you learn and you develop the skill, that becomes automatic. A nice example is thinking about learning to ride a bike. But for most of us, that happened when we were very young, so we can't remember all the focus that was required initially learning to balance. Some of you may have learned to drive a manual car. When you learn to drive a manual car, initially you have to learn about changing the gears, pressing the brakes, pressing the clutch, and you have to be very conscious of that. Once you've learned it, and once you've developed that skill, that becomes automatic, and you don't even think about it. Now, why is that important? Well, if you look at this diagram, when you're doing a controlled task, most of your attention is needed for that primary task, which means you have very little attention for the things I was just talking about that experts do, looking at the opponent, picking up cues in the flight of the ball, that type of thing. But when you have made the primary task automatic, it requires less of your brain processing power, less attention. You have larger residual capacity to focus on other things. And here you can see the difference between the expert and the novice. Because the expert has made so many processes automatic, he has more reserve to focus on other things that are very important to doing well. And this is something that's been shown in something called ego depletion research, that when you give your attention to one thing, it can actually drain you and stop you giving attention and concentration to something else. Now let's link this now to certain attentional disorders. Not disorders or problems that athletes can have. And let's start off with internal distractors. What distracts people from attention? Well, we mentioned some of these things before. What happened before? What about what will happen next? What about thinking too much about your body mechanics and the fatigue and not being motivated? All of these are things that can distract you internally. And all of these lead to something that's often called choking under pressure. What's choking? Well, we believe that choking is an attentional process that leads to impaired performance, where you can no longer execute the task. It occurs when you have an athlete who is quite skilled and is able to do something very well. But suddenly what happens is, because of a distractor, the mechanical execution of that task breaks down. And rather than executing it automatically, they now go back to as if they're learning the task step by step. That no longer makes the task fluid. And the result is they often make a mistake. And we've seen this many, many times with the most elite athletes in the world, where something distracted him. The opponent did something that got them angry. They were about to win the match and they got nervous. Different things can cause these events. Often it's a moment of winning when you get nervous and you start to think about the finish line. So what often leads to choking? Well, you have a very important competition. You're at a critical moment and there's a lot of social pressure. All of these things lead to choking. What does that do? All of these things. It increases a set of physical things. It raises your arousal level, your breathing rate, your heart rate, your muscle tension, and it can change your focus. You now focus on the wrong thing. You focus on just getting to the end, just winning the match. And that now leads to breakdown in timing, too much tension, you rush, and you don't execute as required. Key inside of this process is this body mechanics issue that I was mentioning. Rather than dealing with the task at hand in your automatic way, you lose focus and you start to focus in a very analytical way, as if you were learning the sport, and you end up doing it badly, sorry. That's why the more you can make a task automatic and the more you can keep it on automatic is better for the athlete. It also tells you why perhaps an external focus of attention is better than an internal focus of attention, because we don't analyze the body mechanics at the wrong time. Analysis of body mechanics is good, very important during practice to correct technical deficiencies. But what you want to do in practice is get that sorted out and get that moving to automatic. Well, what about external distractors? Well, these are now environmental distractors from the crowd, from the weather, from the opposition. In many sports, there's what's called trash talking, or in cricket, sledging, where the opponent is deliberately speaking to you or using gamesmanship to distract you. I mentioned before, the crowd will also do that. Or it could be extremely hot or windy, and those things could serve as distractors and divert your attention from the task at hand. So let's conclude by talking about self-talk and how we can utilize that to enhance concentration. Now, in some sports, there's more self-talk than others, but in a lot of sports, in almost all sports, there's some level of self-talk. Now, self-talk can be verbalized, or it could actually be just thoughts in your mind. But what it is actually saying something about yourself. And it can be very useful to keep you focused. You have positive self-talk that can improve your arousal, your confidence, make you focus on technique and calm you down. But also you can have negative self-talk where you'll be very critical and cause you to give up. So for example, like I said, it's a windy day. It's difficult for me to catch the ball or to hit the ball. It's not even worth trying. And then you can have a neutral self-talk, which just is distracting, like as you see in the example. What's going to happen later tonight? Will I go out to dinner? Will I go to a movie? Which just takes your mind totally off the focus at hand. It's neither neutral or positive, but it's not beneficial in that situation. We want to have positive self-talk. Now, here's an example of how self-talk can affect a situation. You just miss a shot in tennis, and you can say two things. You can say something like, what an idiot. How could you make such a mistake? You're never going to win. Statements like that about yourself are only going to increase your frustration or sense of hopelessness. and it's going to make you more tense. On the other hand, you can say, okay, keep your eyes on the ball next time. I'm going to do it better next time. And this match isn't over. I still have a chance. What does that do? Well, that enhances your concentration, gives you a sense of confidence and optimism, and can calm you down, even though you just missed an important shot. So, how does self-talk work? Well, self-talk can serve as a modulator between an event and a response. And that's what I just tried to show you there. Something has happened. Could be a negative thing, could be a positive thing. Before you respond in the wrong way, for example, you could have just hit a very good shot and you're about to win the match. And instead of getting, oh, I'm about to win the match, great, and start to think about all the wrong things you say. Okay, let's just focus here, take it one point at a time, keep your eyes on the ball. Self-talk serves as a modulator between the event and the response, and therefore conditions our response going forward. So what we want to do then, if self-talk modulates our response, we want to change negative self-talk into positive self-talk. And this slide here, you can just pause it and you can just look at examples. I'll never recover from this injury. Positive self-talk. Healing takes time. Let's just keep this up day by day. Negative self-talk. That was a terrible serve. Positive. Slow down. Keep your rhythm and timing. We want to be able, in whatever sport we play, or even in life, not to use negative self-talk. We want to use positive self-talk to ensure that we get the best response. Now, one of the ways of improving self-talk is the ability to identify negative thoughts and to stop them. And that's why you see a big red stop sign there. And we call that thought stopping. And you want to learn to identify negative thoughts. So for example, my knee will never be as strong as it was before the injury. Well, that's a negative thought. If you can pick it up, identify it, thought stopping, then you can say, okay, let me change that negative thought to a positive thought. Let me change that negative self-talk to positive self-talk. And you can say, by working on this issue, by working on other areas of fitness, then while I'm recovering from the injury, different aspects of my game will get better, and I'll actually be a better player before the injury. And turn around what can be a negative situation into a positive situation. The key here, though, to apply thought stopping, is it's important to recognize the negative self-talk. And sometimes that has to be helped by or initiated by those around who can tell you about it, your coaches or your family, who can tell you that you're too negative in the statements that you're making. So here are 5 keys to self-talk as we come to a conclusion. Note though, this little statement here, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. And that goes back to visualization, it goes back to concentration. What you say about yourself can affect what's going to take place. So the 5 P's of self-talk, it should be personalized, focusing on yourself. Surprisingly, you should practice self-talk. If during practice, all your self-talk is negative, when you go out to play the competition, it's not going to suddenly become positive. So this is something you need to practice. You should know why self-talk, why are you using it? What's the point of it? Or else it might be better not to talk at all. It should have a purpose. Always phrase your self-talk positively, providing motivation, confidence, technical adjustment. And the position. Tailor your self-talk to what's taking place right now. Don't use self-talk about something that's going to take place tomorrow or took place in the past. Focus on the moment. All of that is part of concentration. So there we have it, concentration. One of the key elements to being a successful athlete. And like everything that we've spoken about, something that you can improve, but it has to be practiced. Until we meet again, take care.